What is the Save Act? What is going on with our elections? Is our midterms safe? That's a big question that I've looked into as of the recent week because I do want to understand why the Save Act was being utilized as this big talking point. On the surface, from the average person like no, I wouldn't call myself the average person, but just the average voter who didn't really know much about the Save Act, it seemed like it was, oh, just have your IDs when you vote. And generally, when I came into it, I thought, okay, if it's that simple, why are we making a big hoopla out of it? Now, I didn't realize the larger implications of what this would mean, the different obstacles that will get in line for certain voters. And I didn't realize the larger plan that is taking place from the Trump administration. So, in this segment of Research on the Dime, we are going to dive into what the SAVE Act is, what it will do to society, and what it seems like, in my opinion, the Trump administration's overall plan might be for the midterm elections. So, first things first. The Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, known as the SAVE Act, is the Republican flagship election bill that would require Americans to present documentary proof of U.S. citizenship, such as a passport, birth certificate, military ID showing U.S. birth, or a real ID that indicates citizenship in order to register to vote in federal elections. So it's not as simple as having your ID. No, you need to prove you're a US citizen. Taking a step further, the current version moving through Congress, the Save American Act, H.R. 7296, goes even further by also requiring a strict government issued photo ID at the polls on election day and mandating that states share their voter registration data directly to the Department of Homeland Security. So, again, going a step further regarding this election stuff. The bill would fundamentally change how Americans register to vote by requiring anyone who registers by mail to present their citizenship documents in person at the office of the appropriate election official before the registration deadline, effectively killing online voter registration, mail-in registration, and third-party voter registration, which drives that millions of Americans rely on. So these systems are things that most Americans do nowadays. It's much more efficient, it's much more easygoing, it's not as strenuous. Consider all of us work every single day and are very busy with their own lives. But now we have to go to specific offices to get specific documentation to vote, making it a much more annoying process, even though Americans are currently not even voting enough at the moment. Under the Save America Act, a standard driver's license without a real ID stamp would not be accepted as proof of citizenship, and only 5 states, Michigan, Minnesota, New York, Vermont, and Washington, currently issue IDs that denote U.S. citizenship on the card. The Save America Act passed the House of Representatives by a vote of 218 to 213, with only one Democrat, Representative Henry Keeler of Texas, crossing the aisle to join all House Republicans in voting yes. The bill now heads to the Senate, where it reportedly has near unanimous Republican support on the merits, but lacks the 60 votes needed to overcome the filibuster. And Senate Majority Leader John Thune has so far resisted calls from the president and some Republican senators to abolish the filibuster to force it through. Because we know if they abolish the filibuster, if they decide to finally go through with it, it's going to be very ugly moving forward for elections for Republicans in particular. The bill would also require states to scrub non citizens from voter rolls on an ongoing basis using data from the Social Security Administration and DHS, mandate voter roll purges every 30 days, and create programs to cross reference voter registrations with federal immigration databases. This version of the bill also prohibits universal mail voting, which would end the primary method of voting in 8 states and DC, and includes a restrictive list of acceptable photo IDs that ban the use of student IDs, even those issued by state universities, and only accept tribal IDs if they contain an expiration date, which many do not. The bill creates severe criminal penalties for election officials as well, including up to 5 years in prison or civil lawsuits if they register a non citizen, or even a citizen who failed to provide the proper documentation. And it creates a private right of action, meaning any person can sue an election official for a violation. This puts local election administrators in an impossible position. They face prosecution for honest mistakes, creating a massive incentive to reject any registration where documents don't match perfectly rather than risk their freedom. Now, the question is, with all this stuff, the intuition from the average voter who doesn't really know anything about anything goes like, oh, well, we're just making things more secure, just holding them more accountable for this crazy thing that has taken place. And one thing that I want to be very clear about is I do think generally in America, there is a agreed upon sentiment that we shouldn't act in very drastic ways, making it harder for all Americans for the few, for the small percentage. And I want you to keep in mind the actions that affect a small percentage versus what is happening to the majority of Americans. We can think of multiple issues that exist right now where people on both sides agree or disagree with broad policy plans, broad laws, or broad stipulations that will change your life altogether. And I'll give you very clear, distinct examples after I explain what exactly is happening in our elections. So, more than 21.3 million voting age American citizens either don't have a proof of citizenship document like a birth certificate, passport, or naturalization certificate, or don't have ready access to one. According to a 2023 survey by the University of Maryland Center for Democracy and Civic Engagement, roughly 51% of all Americans don't even have a passport, which is costly and time consuming to obtain. I don't even have a passport. Obtaining replacement documents takes time and money that many Americans simply don't have, making this requirement function like a modern day poll tax for citizens who are already eligible to vote in the first place. An estimated 69 million American women who change their names after marriage don't have birth certificates that match their current legal names, meaning they would need to produce additional documentation, such as a certified copy of their marriage license, to bridge the gap between their birth certificate and their driver's license. A burden that would never be imposed on men in the same way, of course. Nearly 90% of women change or hyphenate their names after marriage, meaning their passport, birth certificate, and driver's license may all show different information. And under the SAVE Act, every time these women move, change party affiliation, or update their registration, they would have to go through this documentation process again. Young voters, college students, and trans Americans face uniquely severe barriers under this bill. Student IDs would not count even if issued by public universities. Young people are less likely to have passports and move more frequently, requiring re-registration each time. And an estimated 210,800 trans American voters or trans Americans in voter ID states already lacked IDs correctly reflecting their name or gender before these new proposals, with many unable to update every document due to hostile state policies, leaving their birth certificate, passport, and state ID all showing different information. Rural voters would be hit especially hard by the requirement to present documents in person at an election office, since in the 30 largest counties by area in the western United States, voters would have to drive an average of 260 miles round trip to reach their county election office. And some voters in Alaska and Hawaii would literally have to fly to reach an election office. People who would rely on public transit, cannot leave work during business hours, have disabilities, or elderly would have faced similar barriers to completing in-person registration requirements. So as you can see, there's just so many things that a lot of people, regardless of your gender, your race, where you live, that people would have to get all this documentation despite them already being eligible to vote in the first place. When Kansas tried a nearly identical documentary proof of citizenship law starting in 2011, it blocked, and hear me out, how many voters got blocked from this? It blocked more than 31,000 citizens from voting, 12% of all first-time registrants, And a state expert conceded in court that most of those people were legitimate US citizens who simply couldn't navigate the paperwork requirements before a federal court struck the law down as an unconstitutional burden on voting rights in 2018. Arizona's split system, which requires proof of citizenship for state but not federal elections, has barred roughly 32,000 voters, disproportionately younger people near college campuses, and a federal appeals court struck down further Arizona proof of citizenship laws in February 2025 as unlawful voter suppression. So, in both cases, where there were states trying to implement this kind of proof of citizenship voter law, what happened is more people could not vote. More US citizens who were legally allowed to vote could not vote. Voting is something that is a right for every American citizen. So the more barriers, the harder you make it, is denying him the very clear, very important, valuable right that will change and affect America moving forward. And we'll probably talk about it a little bit later, but I think we know exactly why this is really happening. So, what exactly is the issue? Why do we need the SAVE Act? Why do we need these proof of citizenship laws? It must be happening at like a 50% clip. There must be thousands of illegal immigrants voting and affecting the elections, right? Well, the evidence overwhelmingly shows that non-citizen voting is vanishingly rare. A 2025 audit of Michigan's 7.2 million registered voters in the 2024 election found only 15 unsuspected citizens who actually cast the ballot. If you need a percentage to that, that is 0.0000028%. That is 4 zeros after the zero, after the decimal point, 28%. That's how much it's been destroying elections for the most part. And election officials in Utah reviewed 2.1 million registered voters and found exactly one confirmed non-citizen on the rolls who had never even voted. 2.1 million registered voters. One person who didn't even vote. One non-citizen who didn't even vote. Georgia's voter roll audit before the 2024 election found only 20 registered non-citizens out of 8.2 million registered voters statewide, and only 9 of those have ever cast a ballot. 9 out of 8.2 billion. That's another 0.000 whatever percent. So it's interesting how we need to create this law for this problem happening in America that's happening less than 1% of the time. But we don't have that same energy for other things that are much more dire. I'm sure you guys heard it. How many people are suffering from mass shootings? And the talking point every single time regarding mass shootings or the assault weapon ban is, oh, it only happens to less than 10% of the people. Mass shootings only happen less than 10% of the time. That's why we don't really need laws to deal with mass shootings, right? That's the sentiment consistently. Something that is very clear more of an issue, because unlike the 0.0000% of non-citizens that are trying to vote in our elections, real children die. They don't come back. They can't go back to their parents. These are real, dire consequences. But there's always pushback and pushing policy for these situations. But now we're trying to push policy for a situation like this where it's a non-issue. Now, of course, there might be people saying, well, we want 100%. We want 0 people. There has never been a system that is put in place where it's 100%. Like 100% of the time, there isn't a problem or someone trying to take advantage of the system. Unfortunate as it says, there will be people who try to circumvent the system. It happens. I don't like that it happens, but it does. So when we create things, when we create systems in place, the job of the system we put in place is it mitigates the harm. and mitigates the risk. That is the purpose of the citizen. We're trying to optimize the people that are using it correctly and minimize the risk to the point where the people who aren't using it correctly are as little as possible. It's always a comparative analysis. Looking at the full board of 100%, we want it as close to 100% as possible. And you don't get closer than 99.99999%. That seems pretty damn efficient to me. But let's continue. Non-citizens are already prohibited from voting in federal and state elections under existing law. It's already illegal. And those who attempt to vote face severe penalties, including jail time, fines, and deportation. Already things in our legal system, creating a powerful deterrent that makes the risk far outweigh any conceivable benefit. The current federal voter registration form already requires registrants to swear under penalty of perjury that they are U.S. citizens, and multiple states take additional verification steps beyond the federal requirement. Even the Trump administration's own data has confirmed the lack of widespread non-citizen voting. States like Louisiana that comb through their voter rolls, specifically looking for legally cast non-citizen votes, have repeatedly come up empty, and no credible evidence of any organized plot to encourage non-citizens to vote has ever been produced despite years of claims. House Speaker Mike Johnson acknowledged the lack of proof when introducing their original SAVE Act, saying non-citizen voting is not been something that's easily provable. That's what Mike Johnson said. You're a Republican bitch. While still insisting people should intuitively know it's happening. That's the type of verbiage he has to use because he has no fucking proof. The proposed solution would disenfranchise millions of eligible American citizens to address the problem affecting at most a few dozen people in any given state. A solution one analyst compared to trying to take out a mosquito with a rocket launcher. That is such a good analogy. That's what this is. Oh my goodness, we should have no mosquitoes. They carry malaria. Mosquitoes all should die. So let's kill it by using a fucking nuke. All mosquitoes die. This one mosquito that's here, it has to die too. Nuke it. That's exactly what's going on. That's the perfect way to analogize the current circumstance. If the true goal was election security, the most effective approach would be strengthening the systems that already catch non-citizens' registrations, not creating new barriers that overwhelmingly impact eligible citizens. A Pew Research survey found that 83% of Americans support requiring government-issued photo ID to vote, which is unfortunate because people just like me, so I can't really be mad at them. I thought it was simply, oh yeah, just have your ID. It's not. But MAGA has controlled the messaging in there, making you think that this is just about having an ID. It isn't. Which proponents of the SAVE Act cite as evidence of public support. So that's what they're going to use. Say, oh yeah, see, they want the SAVE Act. You know, we're kind of manipulating our language, but they want the SAVE Act. But the same survey found 58% of respondents also support maintaining mail-in voting, and there's a critical difference between showing an ID at the polls, which most states already require, and the SAVE Act's unprecedented requirement to produce original citizenship document. So they're trying to make it seem like, oh, just bring your ID. No, that is not what's going on. They're going much further than that, and I am ignorant to not know that. But that is why I do this podcast, so I can give you the correct information. Anyway, continuing. What is this bitch in my chat saying? So tired of nobody, armchair losers trying to teach anyone anything. What have I been wrong about? Aish? What I'm tired of is like dumb fucks in my chat who think they know anything. But when I ask like, okay, what I've been wrong about? Nothing. You have nothing to say because you're a useful idiot that Trump loves to feed off of. You're a useful piglet that Trump loves to lie to. And then you just agree because you have no you have no sense of self-identity. What was I trying to say? What was I yapping about? Anyway, continue on because I got triggered a little bit. Why do I attract so much hate for? Because I tell the truth, Austin. It's just, I'm not interested in the bullshit with all these other people. I attract hate from the right and I attract hate from the left, but I don't give a fuck. I'm going to give you the same energy. You dumb fucks, you have the opportunity to prove I'm wrong, but none of you can. And you get exposed every single time. And I'm okay with that. It makes me look better. gives me more credibility. Continuing on, this is not where the story ends. I gave you the definition, I gave you an explanation on what the SAVE Act is. And clearly, it's some bullshit. I think we all can recognize that. However, there's more to what's going on. Trump and his admin are doing other things in addition to disenfranchising voters to shake up election sentiment. On March 25th, 2025, Trump signed an executive order titled Preserving and Protecting the Integrity of American Elections that directed the Election Assistance Commission, which Congress specifically designed to be insulated from presidential control, to make fundamental changes to how elections are conducted, including giving DHS and DOJ access to state voter rolls to facilitate voter purges, directing the EAC to withhold federal funding from states that count mail ballots postmarked by election day, but received after, and attempting to impose a documentary proof of citizenship requirement on the federal voter registration form. A federal judge blocked the order, ruling that the Constitution assigns the presidential no role in administering or certifying elections, and that the framers deliberately excluded the executive branch from election administration. MAGA is trying to tamper with elections. They have no right to do this. Elections are run by the states, but this is the political overreach, dare I say, the fascist tendency that people that are authoritarians try to do. They want elections to be in their favor, so they try any means possible to do it. And this executive order, the SAVE Act, these are all things coinciding with the larger plan and scheme of trying to win the midterms, because they know they've been doing a dog shit fucking job. They've been terrible at their job. A 17-page draft executive order titled Establishing Security, Integrity, and Transparency for the United States Elections with Protections Against Foreign Interference has been circulating among Trump allies since at least April 2025 and represents the most extreme version of the election takeover plan. It would require every ballot to be hand-marked on American-made paper and hand-counted in public at each precinct, force every voter in America to re-register from scratch with documentary proof of citizenship, ban drop boxes and no excuse absentee voting, require notarization for all absentee ballots, cap precincts at 1,500 voters each, requiring the creation of thousands of new precincts, and strip state courts of jurisdiction over election challenges, moving them all to federal court. This is another thing MAGA has been floating around. It's so clear on what they're trying to do. The draft order's legal justification rests on declaring foreign interference in American elections a national emergency, cobbling together a grab bag of emergency powers, including the IEEPA, the same statute Trump used to justify tariffs before the Supreme Court struck it down. The Defense Production Act and the Federal Information Security Modernization Act, none of which give the president any authority over how states run elections. Constitutional law experts note that even if Trump signs the order, local election officials don't work for the president and can simply ignore it. Since, as Professor Justin Levitt told Democracy Docket, the law doesn't require anybody to file anything in court to stop the impact. It just requires not listening, which is a very important thing to note, that these local places, these states, need to really stand 10 toes in dealing with an authoritarian. In my opinion, this is nothing I can confirm. This is more intuition speaking, more potentially even hyperbole. But I do wonder if there is a larger scheme and larger plan that is taking place. We know when it comes down to foreign interference, you know what? I'm going to save that for later, because I do think there might be something shady in regards to Trump, regards to other countries that have a very invested interest in affecting our elections, in regards to this act in particular. Moving forward, on February 13, 2026, Trump posted that there will be voter ID for the midterm elections, whether approved by Congress or not. We know he doesn't respect Congress. We know that he wants to be a fascist authoritarian that tells people what to do without any recourse. He followed this by a longer post claiming he had discovered legal arguments that would justify imposing election changes by executive order alone, which election law experts believe refers either to the draft emergency order or to a bizarre legal theory advanced by Peter Tickton, a Florida lawyer whose main claim to fame is having been teenage Trump's roommate at boarding school and who's been suspended from practice of law at least twice. The Constitution's election clause is explicit about who controls elections. It gives state primary authority to set the times, places, and manner of holding elections, with Congress, not the president, having the power to override state rules by passing actual laws. The founders deliberately excluded the president from this process because they had just fought a war to free themselves from a monarch and had no intention of empowering a president to seize control of elections, which is why every federal election law ever passed, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the National Voters Registration Act of 1993, and the Help American Vote Act of 2002, was enacted to make it easier to vote, not harder, because it's a right, ladies and gentlemen. The Trump Justice Department are trying to act. They're trying to make things very difficult by doing things like suing at least 24 states to force them to hand over their complete voter rolls, including social security numbers and driver's license data, using the Civil Rights Act of 1960 as the legal justification. A law that was specifically passed to protect Black citizens' right to vote by preventing local officials from throwing out their registrations and ballots, now being repurposed as a tool for mass voter data collection. The DOJ's plan to compile a master list of all Americans and cross-reference it against state or voter rolls to identify supposed non-citizens, with a proposed settlement agreement that would give the DOJ the power to demand states purge specific voters from the rolls. This will give the DOJ and the president way too much power. And it dawns on me how the current administration constantly is using laws and actions and justifications that were meant to protect the people from the local state governments, but are now being used to attack them. He tried to do the same thing regarding the National Guard and sending them over to countries or sending them over to states without the governor's permission. And the justification was this, is that another time the president did this was back in the day where the president brought in the National Guard to protect Black citizens from the state that was clearly racist against them and denying them their own rights. So the president brought in the National Guard to protect the citizens. Trump brought in the National Guard to go after them. And then another situation where a law was put in place to protect Black citizens from very clear racist states back in the day, he's using this act to, again, attack citizens. It is a crazy, manipulative, bad faith, disgusting, evil way to repurpose law. And sometimes I get very black-pilled that people that are, it's kind of the situation with bad and evil lawyers, right? We know that there are very clearly bad actors right there. There is a crime some guy did where he maybe essayed a woman or a child or just did the most despicable things you can think of. But then there's a lawyer willing to defend him, willing to come up with all these weird justifications and manipulate law as much as possible to prove their case. Those people we see in these television series and in reality, those people are running our country right fucking now. And at some point, we got to ensure that we're enacting some types of checks and balances to really note these people are garbage. They are evil pieces of garbage. Continuing on, because we're not done, ladies and gentlemen. We're not even close to done. Most states told the DOJ to pound sand. In Michigan, a judge dismissed the lawsuit because internally compiled voter lists aren't voter registration material under the 1960 Act. In California, a judge ripped the administration for perverting laws meant to protect voting rights and tools of voter suppression. And in Oregon, a judge pointed to Attorney General Pam Bondi's letter offering to call off ICE raids in Minnesota in exchange for the state handing over its unredacted voter rolls. Did you hear me? They used ICE doing the bullshit they were doing in Minnesota as a means to pressure Minnesota, blackmail Minnesota, saying, oh, we'll get rid of them. Give us your voter rolls. Are we serious right now? Man, if I had the "Are we serious right now, bro" meme, I would play that right now because it works perfectly for this situation. But it's crazy. It's quite insane. Because that ICE stuff had nothing to do with election integrity, very clearly. On January 28, 2026, FBI agents raided the Fulton County, Georgia elections hub with a warrant and left with approximately 656 boxes of election documents from the 2020 election. From the 2020 election, including original ballots, voter machine tabulators, and absentee ballot envelopes. The warrant cited 2 federal statutes, one requiring preservation of voter records and one criminalizing ballot fraud, both of which carry a 5-year statute of limitations, making it virtually impossible to charge anyone for crimes related to the 2020 elections. And the supporting affidavit relied on debunked election fraud theories from witnesses who sourced the data from random websites. So we're past the statutes of limitations. So the idea of like finding fraud and making someone criminally liable, that's not going to happen. So why are they here? What are they doing? Why are they doing what they're doing? Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard was present at the Fulton County raid, despite having 0 domestic law enforcement authority by statute. A deliberate limitation because intelligence agencies possess surveillance powers that would violate the Fourth Amendment if applied domestically. So they can go and like really look into people's information internationally. They can't do that domestically. So why is she here? What is going on? Are they breaking the law? Who would have thought? MAGA breaking the law? The administration couldn't get its story straight about why she was there. Trump first denied she was present, then said Attorney General Bondi insisted on it. Bondi's deputy said she just happened to be in Atlanta, and Gabbard said the president requested her presence. While the New York Times reported Gabbard passed through the agents conducting the raid to speak directly with the president, who told them they were doing a great job. So Gabbard, who wasn't supposed to be there, had the president on the line talking to these people, telling them that they were doing a great job. This is like evil fucking kingpin shit right here. Calling directly to the FBI and telling them they're doing a great job. Like, what are we doing here? What is going on? What is the president... What is my fascist dictator doing? The Fulton County raid, combined with the DOJ lawsuits against 24 states, sends a clear intimidation signal to every election administrator in every competitive county in America. We have the FBI and we're not afraid to use it, is a sentiment. Senator Mark Warner, the top Democrat on the Armed Service Committee, compared the raid to Nixon ordering the Watergate burglary. And even if Fulton County wins its lawsuit to get its materials back, the precedent has been set that the federal government is willing to use law enforcement offensively against local election officials whose certified results the president didn't like. So again, the president and the DOJ do not have jurisdiction over these elections. They don't have a role in these elections. These local states, local counties do. There's been no evidence of voter fraud at all. The only evidence of fraud that happened in Georgia was the false slate of electors scheme that Donald Trump tried to do that has been proven. That was very criminal. That was fraud, but Trump is not going to get punished for it. And the other example of fraud that happened in Georgia was Elon Musk. Apparently, he has been caught with voter fraud because he's been sending ballots to people that was not governmental ballots, that were pre-filled ballots to voters. That's election fraud. Elon Musk was doing that in Georgia. So if we're talking about fraud, let's talk about real fraud. But in this situation, when there was no real fraud, the federal government felt like they could do whatever the fuck they want, go raid a elections office and just take whatever the fuck they feel like. That's crazy. It's insane. But it's very clear. They want you scared. They want you intimidated. Ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't stop there though. My show is not over because there's more to talk about. In a January 16, 2026 court filed titled Notice of Corrections to the Record, The DOJ admitted that in March 2025, a political advocacy group contacted two members of the Doge team embedded at the Social Security Administration requesting they analyze state voter rolls the group had acquired, and that one Doge staffer signed a voter data agreement in his official capacity as an SSA employee and sent the executed agreement back to the group on March 24th, 2025, 4 days after a federal judge had issued a temporary restraining order explicitly blocking Doge's access to SSA data. We had people in Doge giving out voter information, ladies and gentlemen. We had people in Doge, this fucking wannabe ass agency that did jack shit, giving out voter information. The advocacy group stated aim was to find evidence of voter fraud and to overturn election results in certain states. And while the court filing doesn't name the group, the evidence strongly points to the True the Vote group, a right-wing election denial organization that published an open letter titled An Appeal to Doge on March 5th, 2025, urging Doge to use federal databases, including the SSA, to probe voter rolls. True the Voter founder Catherine Engelbrecht wrote at the top of the letter that we've received word that this message is being carried forward, and that methodology described in the court filing, combining privately assembled voter roll data with federal databases, mirrors exactly what the True the Vote was publicly proposing. So this random fucking group that were a bunch of Trump dick suckers who believed the election was stolen convinced a staffer in Doge to give them Social Security information, voter information from federal databases. What the fuck? What is going on? What reality do we live in? The agreement was never reviewed or approved through SSA's standard data exchange procedures. No SSA employees outside the Doge team were aware of it, and SSA didn't discover it until an unrelated internal review in November 2025, meaning rogue Doge operatives were cutting deals with political advocacy groups using the personal data of millions of Americans with zero oversight. Doge team members also used the third-party server Cloudflare, which is not approved for storing SSA data, to share data between March 7th and March 17th. And SSA has been unable to determine what information was shared or whether it still exists on that server. People, a bunch of far right-wingers might have your information because some Doge staffers gave it to them. That's the type of competency we have in our executive branch right now. And I'm glad someone in my chat told me about this and I looked it up. That's why I'm able to give it back to you and help you understand what the fuck is going on right now. Two specific Doge staffers have been publicly connected to voter fraud schemes at SSA. Antonio Gracias, a billionaire embedded at SSA, publicly spoke at March 30th rally alongside Elon Musk about using Social Security data to expose voter fraud. And Aram Magdassi separately reached out to Florida officials to obtain voter registration data for cross-referencing with government databases. Did you hear what I said? This dude, Antonio Gracias, who gave out voter data, was in Doge, a billionaire, had access to your data without any checks, and then gave it out to other people with no checks. That's the type of administration we're working with right now. If you didn't know, SSA made 2 Hatch Act referrals to the Office of Special Counsel in late December regarding the Doge employees' conduct, since the Hatch Act prohibits federal employees from using their official authority to interfere with elections. Democracy 4 filed FOIA requests seeking a copy of the voter data agreement, the Hatch Act referrals, communications between Doge staff and True the Vote, and records on the Cloudflare data transfers, and also filed new motions in court demanding depositions and discovery, pointing out that the government's earlier statements to the court denying that Doge was accessing SSA data turned out to be flatly false. This revelation comes as the Trump administration simultaneously pulls the Save America Act, which would mandate states to share their voter rolls with DHS, essentially trying to legalize through legislation what Doge was already doing illegally through back channels. So this is not a theory anymore. This is not like a speculation on what they're trying to do. This is something that they've already been trying to do, that they are taking your information, that they're trying to prove this case of fraud that has not existed. But they're trying their hardest, though. And overall, what this will mean in the long run is very powerful people will have access to your information, and very powerful people will have access, will have the ability to, dare I say, make it very difficult for you to enact your innate American right to vote. That's what's going on right now. That is what's going on at the moment, right now. But we're not done. I know there's a lot of information, but I do think it's important because this paints the full picture of what is taking place regarding this whole MAGA conspiracy, of this whole thing that they're trying to do with election interference and voter data. It's very clear that the SAVE Act wasn't just simply, oh, just have your ID to vote. No, it's a layered plan that MAGA has been doing for a very, very long time. But there's another thing that I learned called Eric Exodus that I found very interesting. And the reason why this is interesting is that it tells you a very clear picture that Republicans and honestly some Democrats willingness to care about voters and voter information. That is generally how I'm going to put it. So 9 Republican-led states, Alabama, Florida, Iowa, Louisiana, Missouri, Ohio, Texas, Virginia, and West Virginia, left the Electronic Registration Information Center between 2022 and 2023, gutting the bipartisan, nonpartisan system that was the most effective tool in America for keeping voter rolls clean. So all this stuff regarding voter roll data and having the best information possible, well, ladies and gentlemen, you may not know we already had something like that. It existed in terms of getting proper information, keeping it nice and organized, and being very nonpartisan. We had something like that, but Republicans turned on it. Republicans didn't like it. We'll talk about that in a second. ERIC is what it's called. Was founded in 2012. Grew to 33 states plus DC by 2022, and works by having member states submit voter registration and motor vehicle data every 60 days, so ERIC's system can identify voters who have moved, died, registered in multiple states, or have duplicate registrations. The exact kind of voter roll maintenance Republicans claim to want. So that already existed, and majority of the country was pitching in and providing the information willingly because this was an objective, nonpartisan system that was just here to keep things clean regarding voter roll. That's all it was here for. The exodus was triggered by false claims from the far-right website Gateway Pundit in January 2022, alleging ERIC was funded by George Soros and run by partisan operatives trying to pad rolls for Democrats, none of which was true. Are you surprised that it's not true? Of course it's not fucking true. As ERIC is funded by a member states and governed by a bipartisan board of state election officials. Trump amplified the conspiracy on True Social in March 2023, writing without evidence that ERIC pumps the rolls for Democrats. And that same day, Florida, Missouri, and West Virginia all announced their departure, with Iowa, Ohio, Virginia, and Texas following in subsequent months. The real objections many Republican officials had was ERIC's requirement that member states reach out to eligible but unregistered voters to encourage registration, which some viewed as helping Democrats, revealing that the dispute was never about election integrity, but about who gets the vote. The hypocrisy was stunning. Iowa's Republican Secretary of State called ERIC an effective tool for ensuring the integrity of Iowa's voter rolls. Less than a month before leading the state's pullout, he changed his sentiment. And Ohio's Frank LaRose called ERIC one of the best fraud-fighting tools that we have, and then immediately pushed the state to withdraw. Officials publicly praising the system while privately moving to kill it. What does that mean? What is going on here? This paints the very clear picture. This is not about voter roll. This is not about making sure that the information is as clean as possible. Statistically, we know non-citizens don't vote. And if we're talking about ensuring that voter roll is like as clean as possible, well, we had a system like that before. But the problem was that they were pissed off about the ERIC system telling people who aren't registered to register so they can vote. So they were pissed off that people were voting more. So they created a grand conspiracy on it being paid by George Soros or that it's padding Democratic voter roll. They don't care about voter roll. They care about control and they care about manipulating the types of people who vote. That's the very clear picture. After getting all the information, that is exactly what is going on because these Republicans, these bootlicking pieces of garbage, will go out of their way and praise the system because it's doing the exact job they claim they want. But in reality, they just want votes. They just want Republican votes. They don't care about ethics. They don't care about a system that helps the people and good information. They don't care about creating a better electoral process. They care about maximizing Republican votes. That's all they care about. That's all they ever cared about. It's disgusting. Documents show that states that left Eric had no long-term or even short-term plans to replace the data tools they lost and now are struggling with a piecemeal approach that costs more and delivers less. Virginia paid $3,445 just to access the National Death Database and another $28,960 for a private company to match it against voter rolls. Services Eric had provided as part of a roughly $40,000 in annual dues plan. So this is stuff that they had to pay, of course, and states have resorted to signing individual bilateral agreements with neighboring states rather than having access to the full multi-state network. As states leave, the remaining members also lose data quality since fewer participating states means less ability to catch cross-state duplicates and movers, making sure that when people are moving around and going on and changing their identity, of course, you want to make sure you're having the same information. You're not counting people twice. Like that's what we don't want people to get counted twice. So this is supposed to just make things easier. Ohio is one of the 9 states that abandoned Eric, which means Ohio voters heading into 2026 midterms now have less accurate voter rolls than they did before the state left, with reduced ability to identify deceased voters, duplicate registrations, and people who have moved. And Georgia could become the 10th state to leave, with its legislature reconvenes in January 2026 after a withdrawal bill cleared the Senate in 2025 session, but stalled before the final passage. Georgia's elections director had said programs like Eagle AI, which conservative activists pitch as an Eric replacement, based AI fixes all, I guess, only use data states already have access to and offer no added value, and that individual state compacts require much more time and personnel to maintain and can't replicate what Eric provides. It's insane, ladies and gentlemen. When it comes down to it, elections need to be secure. I think we all can agree to that. Elections need to be secure. It needs to have proper checks and balances and proper punishments. We've spoken about a few of them so far. Did you know we had an agency called the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which was created in 2018 to specifically protect critical infrastructure, including election systems, from foreign cyber attacks, coordinating with state and local election officials to provide threat assessments, harden election systems against hacks and manipulation, and run real-time situation rooms on election day to monitor attacks as they happen. People, this has already existed. This is something that we would want, right? I think Republican, Democrat, we all agree that, oh yeah, more security so these foreign hackers don't try to manipulate our elections. We already know that they've tried multiple times. We know Russia has tried. We know China has tried. We know as Iran has tried. And whether people agree or not, it doesn't really matter to me. We just know that they also tried more to help Republicans than Democrats, but they want to ignore that fact, whatever. Regardless, I don't want them helping Democrats. I don't want them helping Republicans. I don't want election interference. I don't want other countries manipulating our votes. So an agency like this made perfect sense. And if you are the party of election integrity, you should be gung-ho about this, right? You should want this agency to be more powerful. In early 2025, the Trump administration fired the CISA employees, froze all election security activities pending an internal review, and cut all funding to the Election Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center, the hub through which election officials across the country shared threat intelligence. So, the agency that was created to keep our elections more secure from foreign threats, Trump fired the employees, cut their funding, and cut a lot of their processes. Do you still think that what Trump is doing it to protect voting, protect elections? At this point, do you still think that is what's going on right now? That's not all. And I have a, dare I say, tinfoil hat theory on the larger implications on what this means. But in November 2025, for the first time in years, CISA did not stand up its election day situation room, leaving election officials without real-time federal support to detect and respond to cyber threats during voting. Arizona Secretary of State Adrian Fontes said election officials are now effectively flying blind without CISA support, stripped of the early warning system that had protected American elections from foreign interference since 2018. The administration's justification for the draft emergency executive order that would give Trump control over the 2026 midterms is that foreign interference in American elections constitute a national emergency. But the agency specifically created to detect and counter foreign interference has been gutted, has been destroyed. So I think you should start being able to piece certain things together. If he wants to implement an executive order, an act, to basically get, dare I say, executive control over elections, let's simplify it a little bit. He wants to implement that. But in order for him to implement that, he has to prove international interference. You don't think, I'm going to throw this in the air. You don't think that he's gutting this programs to allow more interference so he can use this act to control elections, do you? You don't think it's that fucking evil of a mastermind plan, do you? Because that's the only logic I can see. You cut the security to allow the people to come in and interfere. Then you point out, oh, I have evidence of them interfering. Now let me use my power to control the elections. There's no way that's what's going on, right? There's no way. But I find his relationship with some of these international actors very odd. We've already had theorized speculation that regarding their cooperation with Maduro in Venezuela, that there might be people who potentially could admit that they interfered with the election in Venezuela. We know that Iran has tried to hack us. Is this regime change going to be a situation where they convince the people in charge to admit they hacked our elections? And we already know Russia tries to do it, and we know Trump is best friends with Putin, or tries to be anyway. There's no way. I don't want to. I want to take off my tinfoil hat. I don't want to go down that road. But there's no way. There's no way, right? There's no way. There's no way. That's the difference. So the big picture, how does all of this connect? What is going on, right? Because this is not a series of unrelated policy proposals. It is a coordinated, multi-front campaign to reshape American elections before the 2026 midterms. Claim elections are riddled with fraud despite no evidence. Destroy the bipartisan infrastructure that actually secures elections. Use the resulting chaos and data gaps to justify emergency federal powers. Make it harder for specific demographics to vote through impossible documentation requirements. Intimidate local election officials with criminal penalties and FBI raids. Seize voter data through both legal channels and illegal back channels. All of them, all these things that MAGA is doing, there's a larger plan involved. The Constitution deliberately excluded the president from election administration because the founders, having just fought a war to liberate themselves from a monarch, had no intention of empowering a president to seize control of elections. And every single federal election law ever passed, from the Voting Rights Act to the Help America Vote Act, was enacted to make voting easier, not harder. What we're witnessing is the first time in American history that the executive branch is systematically attempting to use laws designated to protect voting rights as tools of voter suppression. From weaponizing the Civil Rights Act of 1960 to seize voter rolls, to perverting the EAC's mission from electric modernization to election restriction. Election modernization to election restriction. It's crazy. And I just I just felt like this is something everyone should know about.